Welcome to this presentation for certifying to use Type 360 and Leader Agility 360 survey reports. As we go through this presentation, we'll cover the following items: the overall purpose and benefits of multi-rater surveys. We'll have a look at, in fact, the foundations of 360 tools and how they fit into the learning equation. What are the foundations of Type 360 and the foundations of Leader Agility 360? And what does it take to read the reports, and what logistics are important to you as you move forward in using this particular tool? Please note that both instruments, the surveys, were the byproduct of a massive study of several 100,000 multi-rater reports that where a meta-analysis was completed to identify those behaviors which most associated with the 8 functions of psychological type, as well as the 8 leadership competencies that have been defined, and you'll see those definitions a little bit later. The survey purposes in general, like all multi-raters, if they're well-designed tools, really are designed to help an individual gain a deeper understanding of how their behavior affects those around them. Further, Type 360 is anchored in a model of 8 mental functions, the argument being that yes, some of those are very much preferred, but the others are available to use, and learning to use those and how we use those can be extremely important in elevating our personal agility. Leader Agility 360 is on the 8 proven competencies for leaders, which are foundational. You'll see throughout the report but that we cover the question of how often a behavior shows up, how important it is in the current situation, and how effective it is, and how that behavior is perceived when working with individuals who might want to make a more deliberate choice for their development. Multi-rater surveys hopefully provide perceptions that others have of behavior. They're not the absolute truth. They give us patterns, and more important than specific numbers. Well-designed multi-raters provide you multiple ways of looking at patterns of data. We feel it's important to pay attention to the context that may be occurring when dealing with multi-rater data, as well as making sure that we interpret the data in the most meaningful way. Now, we think that whenever you're looking at any kind of report, this would be true of self-report as well as multi-rater data, that you should take in the back of your mind and think about 4 kinds of factors. One is situational. Another is historical. That is to say, they bring with them, the people we're working with bring a history, and they've learned various things over time, and making a sense of that history sometimes can occur when looking at a multi-rater report. There's also the notion of their ongoing development and how that development is showing up, as well as dispositional dynamics that are part of their sort of individual package, which could be affecting behavior at any given time. We know that learning takes time. There has to be reward for effort, that behavior has to be repeated consistently before it sticks, so to speak, that there needs to be active use of and testing of behavior, and there has to be a very specific focus on reducing as many distractions as possible, external and internal. And the 4 internal distractions that show up most of the time are automatic negative thoughts, or worldwide worthless worries, or task unrelated thoughts, or unverified fearful objects. And an unverified fearful object could be not only a long list of things to do, but also a person that seems to be distressing, or even dealing with certain equipment that a person could be afraid of. Any and all of those can create distractions that get in the way of practicing on a platform where you, in fact, can get feedback. We would contend that the evidence is pretty compelling that a cornerstone of development is self-awareness, but it's not sufficient. You have to know what it is that you bring to the table as strengths to leverage and what your blind spots might be, what the particular challenges are and the needs that need to be addressed, and to be very mindful of the principles of learning, which we just covered a moment ago, and to make sure that when we select experiences to stretch and expand our capacities, that we do so in a thoughtful, meaningful way. Now, type and leader development begins with two baselines, meaning if we want to develop our personal type or we want to develop our leadership competencies, we need to get increasingly clarity about our type usages of our mental resources, as well as our leader behavior patterns. And the clarity enables us to get a better handle on what's effective and not so effective, and thereby ask the question of what we might want to change or tweak. So since Type 360 is one of the two surveys, we want to get a good handle on what the type model is, where it comes from, and how we can understand it as a system of energy. Essentially, type is a framework that says we can get increasing conscious control over our various mental processes and the dynamics within those processes, and in so getting control over them, use them and deploy them in a range of situations which enable us to be more fluid in the use of the whole, if you will, engine that we carry around, in the nature of all of us having four avenues to perceiving and four avenues to making decisions. We know that when in challenging situations, we tend to rely on a certain path, but that doesn't always serve us. We keep to the tried and true, but may not be as useful for us. So for example, if you always debate, you may find there are plenty of situations where debating others doesn't serve you well. So recognizing that we may need to switch and adjust is recognizing the complexity of situations and our interactions and how we might choose to do something differently. We know that developmentally speaking, when it comes to type, there are four processes of perception, which we can expand, and four processes of decision making, which we can enrich. And by actively taking perspective on these four, we're able to explore them, reframe them, and integrate them into our lives to use them in as many situations as possible. The type model argues that there's an underlying structure of habits of mind. And in fact, the structure can be revealed in behavior. It's really not about a four-letter code per se, which we often get on instruments like the MBTI, but it's really about the use of mental resources. In fact, the Pearman Personality Integrator, which is a self-report tool, comes at the 8 functions from a self-report perspective. The model says there are 4 dimensions of perceiving and 4 dimensions of judging. With perceiving, it's really about the quality of focus and attention to associations and details and patterns, or in making decisions, how we use logic and how we use our connectivity with others, what frameworks underlie the various approaches we take, and how it fits with our personal mission. The model is simply this, that we are perpetually engaged in a perceiving and judging dynamic in everyday life. We're taking in information and we're making decisions about that information in productive ways. From type, the big picture within type is that whenever we're engaged with others in an active way, we're utilizing extroverting processes. When we are internalizing and reflecting on our experiences with others, we're utilizing introverting processes. Externally, when we're in that external place, We're attending to details. We're looking for the whole. We're wanting to pay attention to the structure we see and find connections. Internally, when we're reflecting on things, we are trying to make sure our detailed review is right and that we've imagined and anticipated future situations. We create if-then scenarios and test out hypotheses and sort of do a values check. Is this what I really wanted to achieve? When we get into definitions of the 8 functions, we see that sensing that's extroverted is more about external focus. Sensing that's introverted is about internal rehearsal. We see that intuiting that's extroverted is around the expression of ideas and possibilities, where intuiting that's introverted is really around how we imagine things and anticipate what's coming in our way. Thinking shows up in the external world when we're logically critiquing something, or in the internal world when we're doing an internal, precise analysis on what could or couldn't happen in the future. And we want to test out and create some hypotheses about what we may be seeing or experiencing. Feeling shows up in the external world by the ways in which we connect with others and seek to understand their experience that enriches, of course, ours. And feeling shows up in the inner world by evaluating the merit of circumstances and how, in fact, that merit fits with our sense of what's right. When we begin to organize these, we see that perceiving can be organized around sensing and intuiting in extroverted and introverted ways, and judging is organized around thinking and feeling in an extroverted and introverted way. And what we know is that when we begin to put these together, what we perceive and how we judge, other models create a shorthand called a type code. And in this case, the type code tells us that both our ESTJs and ISTJs extrovert thinking. That judging function shows up in the outer world, and the sensing function is in the inner world. However, in the inner world of the ISTJ, the sensing gets a lot of attention, lots of energy. In the external world of the ESTJ, the thinking gets more energy and more attention as the individual goes about doing what they do. ESTPs and ISTPs, again, perceiving is in the outer world, but for the ESTP, it's a primary first base for them, and for the ISTP, it's a secondary base, and the introverted thinking is a primary base for how they spend their energy and where their mental resources tend to go. So you might ask, so what? Well, we know that behavior patterns give us a sense of strengths and blind spots, and we'll look at a couple of those blind spots in a second. That behaviors can be expressed in various degrees of intensity and frequency, that there are costs and benefits with the behaviors that we engage in, and it'd be useful to understand that equation. And so we can evaluate whether or not that's an equation we're happy about, and whether or not we're using the full range of resources that are available to us as we go about dealing with the challenges and circumstances in our life. So here's an example of a cost-benefit scenario. These 4 types happen to extrovert thinking, and we know that extroverted thinking is a very analytical approach. It seems to be very thorough very often. But what happens is the style gets treated or seen or experienced as condescending, aggressive, and arrogant. And if you know that about your style, not that you intended to do that, but if you know that style shows up that way, you might choose to do some things differently in order to be perceived in the way in which you would prefer. These particular types, these 4 types, extrovert intuition, and we know that intuition is about ideas and possibilities, it very often gets seen as a kind of impulsive or distracted orientation, throwing out ideas that seem unrealistic to others. Those who, of these 4 types, they extrovert feeling, and that tends to get experienced by lots of other people as impulsive or self-dramatizing, maybe even self-important, when in fact what they're trying to do is to be helpful and to do things in a way that will help other people achieve what they want to achieve. But it gets to be seen as a sticky kind of interaction or style. These four types, extrovert sensing, and as a result, that sensing, which is enabling them to scan and see the kinds of details in their environment and the way they respond to things, very often gets labeled as opportunistic and unkind because of the singularity of focus. Well, just know that as the model suggests, we go about doing things that we do because it enables us to be successful, and there's a cost for that. And the more we know that, and the more aware of that we are, the more likely it is we can moderate that when we really need to in order to be more effective. The other part of the platform is Leader Agility 360, and it's useful to know what the competencies are that the Leader Agility 360 profile covers. There are 8, and they're organized into 3 groups. Learning, adaptability, and self-management covers the competencies for self. Communication, decisiveness, and utilizing expertise covers the competencies for working with and dealing with others. And building and mending relationships and managing complexity and change are all about how we're working within an organization. When it comes to learning, the items that cover learning cover the whole notion of the kinds of things a person does to learn from their experience and how that information can be useful to them. We know that when it comes to adaptability, we want to cover how individuals change and select responses from a range of behaviors. That's important as they move forward in the work that they do. When it comes to self-management, it's about regulating impulses, about being proactive, and it's also about how patient we are in dealing with emotional reactions of others. Communication involves both oral and written messaging. The items cover how we pay attention to the sending of a message and the receiving of a message. Decisiveness is attended to by making the right sort of decisive choice and implementing those decisions. And there are questions that cover the strategies that are used to make good decisions. Utilizing expertise has to do with utilizing your own expertise as a leader as well as the expertise of others. We know that that's important for leaders. Maintaining and building relationships is quite vital and quite important throughout an organization and across departments. And finally, managing complexity and change is just an absolutely essential competency today in working with an array of systems and dealing with the paradoxes that occur in everyday organizational life. We know that we all behave in one way or the other related to these competencies, meaning we either show up these behaviors, they show up and they're displayed in a whole variety of ways, or they, in fact, are not being displayed as effectively as they need to. And we might, in fact, pay attention to how they're perceived so we can choose the kinds of things that's worth paying attention to. So both surveys ask about 64 behaviors. 8 of the behaviors cover each of the 8 types, functions within type. Also, 8 behaviors, completely different distribution of those 8 behaviors, cover the 8 competencies of type Agility 360. Raters indicate how important and how expressed and how effective the behaviors are. And we're able to see how all of the behaviors are utilized in varying degrees. With Leader Agility, we know that the same behaviors are being asked, but they're reorganized and cover the agility competencies, which we know can be developed once we understand how they're being perceived and experienced by those that we're trying to lead. Now, the reports are organized exactly the same. They're organized in terms of categories, but the The way the data is laid out is the same, but the organization of the items are different because the model from type or leader agility is different. There's also a report that combines all of the analysis so that there's a combined type and a combined leader agility report that a person could use. Both reports have 17 sections. The 17 sections give you an introduction to the numbers, give you data about the raters. It helps you look at the aggregate information, how these are perceived in relative degrees of effectiveness, what the blind spots and hidden strengths are, how each of, in the case of type, each of the 8 functions, or in the case of leader agility, each of the 8 leadership competencies are utilized, with written comments that are provided by the raters, and then action tips that a person can choose to act on. So keep in mind that the reports cover the 17 sections you see listed here. It's just that the information is organized qualitatively differently, whether we're looking at Type 360 or type or Leader Agility 360. Now, in understanding your reports and when you're interpreting these, it's useful to know the number of people who've completed the rating and what their perception is of the relationship of the person who's being rated. So we have asked people, how well do you know the person? And this is very important when interpreting the data, because if it turns out that a lot of the raters don't know the person very well, then that may explain why some of the scores are what they are. Or if the person knows, the raters know the person exceedingly well, then we might in fact understand that as it comes to making sure that the behavior is a pretty robust measure. Now, what we must have within peers, direct reports, and others, at least 3 people. If at least 3 in those categories do not complete in any one of those categories, there will not be an average in that category. So in this example, the 3 peers, 3 direct reports, and 1 other who completed this, the other data will be rolled up into the overall scores, but will not show up as an individual score throughout the report. So you see here, this is the aggregate summary that gives you the means of frequency, effectiveness, and importance across all 8 of the type processes. You see the summary across the boss, the superior, peers, direct reports, others, and self. Gives you the very big picture. The asterisk tells you there was a 3-point spread in the rating in a group. And when people were asked, is something overdone in a behavior, an exclamation point might in fact show up on the report. There's another matrix element in the report that plots how the various functions or competencies show up, and that's useful for discussing how something is seen and how effective that behavior tends to be. You'll find that in each section of the report, there's a blind spot and a hidden strengths element, and it sorts it by each of the rater groups. So what happens in the statistical analysis is if there's a 0.75 point difference between the self-rating and the others in the averages, it will indicate if it's much lower, it will indicate a blind spot. If it's higher, it will indicate a hidden strength. And you will see that if there were no differences, of course, it would just be blank. There wouldn't be any indication of hidden strength or a blind spot in the report. Each and every mental function and each and every leader agility competency is laid out. Each item is laid out, all 8 items are laid out the same way, such that you see what the average scores are for frequency, effectiveness, and importance, and how people have experienced that. And of course, we're looking for patterns. Is a behavior particularly important but not expressed particularly well? Is it very important, expressed a lot, but not particularly effective? All of those kinds of things will help us zero in on the kinds of behaviors that will be most critical for a person to be successful in his or her work and life. And as I mentioned, each report allows for written comments. Those written comments are organized by mental function or organized by leader competency, which is in the detail of each and every report. There are development guides that are pointed to toward the end of the report to give guidance on if you want to work on, here's what you might do to develop that particular behavior in a more full way. We have a planning sheet that allows you to work with the individual to develop an action plan for something that they want to address, and it is in both reports. So both reports are organized the same way. They cover all of the data, and as you get a chance to study those data points, you'll see the themes and patterns, and you'll be able to help answer the question, is this a behavior that's really important and needs to be boosted for effectiveness? Or is it really important and it needs to be boosted in terms of the frequency with which it is displayed? Once you have set up your account, you'll be able to enter in the dashboard under Login. And as you do, you'll be able then to have access to either edit your profile, manage your particular groups, purchase additional reports if you need to, or administrations really. We don't charge you for every time you print a report for a particular person. The groups are named and the close date associated with that person or group. And then you can see whether or not you need to look at your candidates in any particular way. With each and every candidate, it will tell you how many people have completed the rating on that individual. You can click on raters and see who the raters are and even send a reminder to the raters. And when it's done, when there are enough people who've done the rating, as you see here in the third entry, you see it says complete, and you can then click on Leader Agility is highlighted to get a Leader Agility report or Type 360, or combined to get a combined report. Now, it's important to know that when you buy a license and you start setting the system up, what will occur is, and we have some downloadable PDFs for you to use as reminders. You need to make sure the learner knows and the raters know that they will be getting an email, because once you enter the name and the email address, the system automatically sends them the invitation that says, you've been asked to provide ratings on so-and-so, so-and-so. Please click here in order to complete the ratings. Expect to take about 30 minutes as you answer these particular questions. Now, to complete your certification, you need to download the certification document on the site, send that to info@type360.com, and then you will receive an email providing you access to the administrator dashboard so you can begin administering the tool today. Also, at any time, please feel free to send your questions to info@type360.com, and we'll be happy to respond to you. And if you need an orientation to the dashboard or to the reports, or you have a special problem in some form, we please ask that you reach out and let us help you as you move forward in using the Type 360 or Leader Agility 360 material.